Shalom and welcome back. It's been a while. I know it's been some time since I've made any videos. Oops, we're dropping here. All right, let's start again. There we go. All right, it's my phone, so obviously and stuff I have to be able to record. I haven't been able to record and stuff because my camera, unfortunately, the audio is dead on it, so I'm not going to be able to use that. The other camera, the issues of it and stuff is it has to be baby too much, and it's not so conducive when you're trying to make a video, especially the battery power. I don't have like this endless supply of batteries and stuff to just keep it going and recording. Of course, it only does 20-minute increments, so then again, that also changes the ability and stuff there. They did figure out a thing, because I remember I tried making a few videos on my phone, but then all of a sudden I realized I was having a problem with it. And that was the storage of my phone kept being upgraded by all these app things that go on, and that frustrated me because all the space that I thought I had disappeared. And so I didn't have any ability to really make any videos of any sort, not even to post anything that I was doing on Instagram and stuff for stuff. So my business, I mean, so that in itself kind of changed. But I upgraded the card, so I have a higher level of card in there, so I have more room and more space. So now we're going to be making videos. I'm not going to hold it on my phone, but once I get on YouTube and stuff uploaded, then I'll be able to have it on YouTube to be available. So I figured, hey, this is a perfect time to get going and actually talking about stuff. So let me clean this thing here. All right. So a few things that I want to talk about here is some of the changes that I'm working on. I have been very much thinking like crazy about what I want to do with how I'm doing these videos, just because I want to help just increase the learning capacity, learning abilities and stuff in these videos with a bunch of other different things. Hopefully that'll be implemented within the next year or so. But yeah, I gotta keep this thing focused and study. That's my goal, is to get things to really change and stuff, so that we can get a lot more involved and stuff with things. One of the main things I've definitely wanted to see changed with my videos was the fact that I felt like, for myself personally, and also for you guys, I wanted to really encourage the growth, the direction that I'm definitely going in, and that's the physical applications of the many things that we don't do in life. I've talked about it in other videos, and I feel like I just wanted to readdress this thing, is how, there's a lot of things, a lot of skills, a lot of aspects and stuff of living that has just, lost its way over time. And I feel like this is something that I really feel like has to change, because with anything in life, if you don't follow and keep these skills in your physical life, they get lost. And when they get lost, you get affected by it, because your lack of knowing how to do and function these skills affects the way you're affected in life, period. It's really interesting. I've been actually reading a book that was dated back in 1912, where this gentleman talks about what was going on in his time period, in his generation. And, when you think about all the stuff that you look at, you see the scriptures, you look at historical accounts in other areas, and you put it all together, it's like you really do see that there's this progression of this downhill constant curve that's been taking place, where, people have changed dramatically. And I was really shocked at when I was reading about here in 1912, this guy was complaining about how lazy people are and not wanting to work with their hands and do things and stuff. I'm like, wow, like if he would have seen what happened now, some 100 years later, he'd be shocked at how even worse it's become. And, it just proves so much more to me of the time period we live in and the stuff that's going on in our time period. And so that was a huge thing that I've been working on, is really diving deep into wanting to learn these skills and learn how to do it for myself, my children, I've been, like, for example, my sons and stuff, and encouraging them to understand and look into blacksmithing, and how to go and do the primitive style blacksmithing, not like the whole welding like we see today, where people have gases and electric torches and electric MIG welds, TIG welds, all that kind of stuff. But actually going back to the old form where you're actually utilizing coal and heating up the actual metals, and pounding on an anvil, that kind of stuff, because that stuff, that kind of knowledge and stuff is huge. You could take out the power of the electricity, but you can't stop the person from producing the ability of welding and making items out of metal and stuff, utilizing the whole context of the forge. But if you take away electricity and stuff and other elements, you're now stuck with a primitive version of things. So it's very important that we really hold on to these things. I've been working on weaving and sewing and a bunch of other things for a while now, and I enjoy it. I really do. And to me, it's like, it's so important that we as people, we know how to live on the land. We know how to farm the land. We know how to work the soil. We know how to plant. We know how to deal with things without using electricity. We know how to make fire of any sort, whether it's a fire that's used for purging, purifying, a fire that's used for consuming and destroying, or a fire that's used for cooking. All these different elements, fire used for signaling. All these things are so important to us because it's a part of our life. It's a part of our needing to function in this world. Just like we need the Torah to function completely in this world for our spiritual and our emotional and our physical well-being as well. And, when I look at these things and I see what the Torah teaches us, it's so vitally important that we really listen carefully and we really hear what the Torah wants us to do and what God tells us in His commandments, how He wants us to live, so that we can abide and survive the way he's given us the wisdom to do so. So, in this section of Torah teaching, I should say, I'm going to be focusing on just so many of the many different avenues and stuff that we have to learn from the Torah, which is to help us understand how we're to function and what we're to do, and thinking about the skills and the understanding of what the Bible teaches us and how the Bible helps us to understand, because so many times and stuff, it's anybody can read and then completely not even focus on the words and not even focus on what the words meaning, what the words saying, and totally bypass some of the most important details that we find in Scripture. For example, in Reshit, when the Bible talks about, for example, that it says, "Vayetzer Adonai Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adamah," and the Lord God formed man from the dust, right, and from the soil, right? Well, it's kind of funny when we read that part and stuff. Many times it's been translated dust, but it's not correct in this context. The word afar does not mean dust; it means clay, because you can't actually take dust and dirt and just kind of mold it together. Clay is what keeps things molded together. And so the Torah teaches us that clay is used as a molding, okay? And it's used as a molding material that's from the ground, all right? And so, when we look at these things in the Torah and we start realizing, oh, wow, this is what the Torah is helping me understand and see, the fact that, the basic simplicities of life, how can you replicate things when you're in an environment, maybe it's a war-torn area and you have to go and start from scratch in areas and stuff, how do you build from that status point, these are the things you have that we find in the Scriptures and stuff. What if it's a huge storm that came in and devastated a certain area and stuff? How do you rebuild? How do you start and stuff? All of these things are part of our living, and the wisdom that we want is to follow God's commandments and to learn to be obedient. And, it makes absolute sense as to why the first and foremost aspect that the Torah is ever pointing at is our spiritual life. And that is to physically change, to mold, to humble ourselves, and to become the people that we ought to be. And why it's so vitally important that we learn to become the person that we need to be, and that we humble ourselves in the areas that we need to, so that we accept the reality of what it is the Bible is telling us. So with that being said, join me in this Torah section that we're going to be learning. This is in Bereshit. We're going to be starting here over at Kaftet in verse Aleph. And hopefully I can get this camera to stay still. It's kind of fickle today, I guess. But there we go. All right. So Kaftet verse Aleph. And let's start with a prayer. Adonai, Lord God, I just pray, help us to keep the Torah, the commandments. Deliver us from the enemy. Deliver us from the plots of the enemy. Deliver us from the attacks of the enemy. Help us to run away from the world, and help us to run away from the world's ideologies. Help us to walk in love and mercy, and to keep what the Torah says, to follow what Moshe says, to follow what the prophets told us to keep, to be obedient and submissive. In Mashiach Yoshua's name I pray. Amen. V'yasa Yackov raglav v'yelech aratza b'nei Kedem. So the Torah says that Yaakov lifted up his feet and he went towards the land of the sons of Kedem. So here we see that Yaakov is fleeing from Esav. Yaakov is very impoverished at this moment. He doesn't have much to himself nor to his name. And he's having to go because his brother was wanting to actually kill him. And so because of this and stuff, his father, Yitzhak, tells him to go over to be and stay with Laban and to find a wife there and then eventually come back home. Hopefully that Esau will have calmed down by then and that his wrath would have been set aside. So it says, Vayira, and he saw, and hine, ber besadeh, there was a well in the field. V'hine sham shlosha edrei tzaon, and there were 3 droves of flocks. Rovatzim aleha, that were sitting by it. Kimin haber hahi, for from that well yashku ha'idrim, that the herdsmen would water. Ve'even gadola al pi haber, and there was a great stone that was upon the mouth of the well. V'nasfu, and they gathered Shamba there, Kala idrim, all of the herdsmen, V'galalu et ha'even, and they rolled the stone mi al pi haber, from upon the mouth of the well. So when we look at this passage here, we notice the Torah talks about the fact that here's Yaakov. He all of a sudden finds that there's this well that's in the middle of the field, and then he sees all these herdsmen around it, right? Now, in this segment, he talks about the fact that the well had a big, large stone that was upon the mouth of it, obviously to keep people from stealing the water that didn't belong to them, because it was somebody's well that was dug. And the Bible tells us that the herdsmen would roll the stone from upon the mouth of the well. Now, in this context, when we listen about this, how do you roll a stone, right? Because this is something that, like, we could easily bypass and say, oh, they rolled a stone, that's great, keep going on. But when we stop here, immediately we're told they rolled a stone. So this obviously wasn't a round stone, because if you have a well and you have a round stone on it, you can imagine how massive and huge and how much power it would take just to get it on there, let alone get it off there. It would be ridiculous. So that wouldn't make sense, right? But when you look at it from the context of they rolled the stone, doesn't necessarily mean the stone itself, okay, in a sense rolled, but rather they rolled the stone, so meaning they used something that would cause the stone to be able to be moved. And this is where we're referring from the Torah that cylindrical logs of some sort may have been used in this case that were placed under the actual stone itself, and it was used to push the heavy object so that they could expose the actual well opening to draw water from and also enclose the well opening. And this actually shows us and teaches us and stuff the fact of that attitude of that the most simplest form of how do you move heavy objects, right? And it's funny how, like in stuff, when we look at this thing, we realize, why is this so important, right? Like, why do I need to know that they rolled? Is it because of historical aspects? That's what a lot of people get stuck in, right? A lot of people look at the Bible and they say, oh, it's historical. It's just talking about what happened in the times back and then and stuff. I don't believe that. I don't believe this is for historical, okay? Yes, it does teach us historically what happened, but I believe it really teaches us how we can function at any moment in life. Because you have to think about this and stuff. The Bible taught us about what happened with Noah, right? And when Noah started out, he had to start from scratch. The whole world civilization perished. All that was left was him and an ark and a bunch of animals and whatever was contained in that ark. Once he stepped on the ground, everything was what? Fresh, brand new. Ruins of cities had been destroyed. Areas have been completely collapsed. He had to start from scratch, okay? And, the beginning that you begin to really think about this and stuff is the Torah wants to preserve for us the wisdom we need to function, always in this world. Because we live in it. We have to deal with it. We have to know how to function in it. And so the Torah tells us here that they rolled the stone to give us an understanding about how that stone was moved, right? Then it says, Hishku et hatzaon, and they watered the flock. Now the word hishku, watered, it's a horrible translation to say watered, okay? Because the word itself literally means to make drenched with water, to make moistened with water. Even these are kind of like horrible translation of it, because when you think of the context of drinking, we have a Hebrew word, shatah, which literally means just to drink, to swallow water and drink, okay? But when you're using this word, there's a whole different dynamic of what this word expresses, and that's because this word alone expresses more of an idea of water being poured out and to be like gushing, in a sense, full, because it's used in the sense of irrigating the land. It's used in the sense of a person being given water to drink, like the water just kind of like being flushed in his face, drinking wise and stuff. So to say watered, like I said, it's just a very simple translation, but the word has more of a meaning to make moist, to filled with water. You have to have a lot of different points that you'd have to bring up, because you can see the context of it, how it's used. It varies. And that's why I said, for example, if you were to look in earlier in Bereshit, for example, you'd find that when the Bible talks about the Garden of Eden, well, it says that the spring that would, the spring, this geyser of water that would come up from the earth, the Bible says that it would hishka, it would make moist all of the face of the ground. So, I mean, it talks about saturating it with water. So the context of the word hishku, as we find here, is talking about this saturation of water, meaning that it's like the flocks are literally drinking and just, in a sense, putting their faces and getting filled with the water that's coming from this well. It says, V'hishvu et ha'even, and they would return the stone, al pi haber, upon the mouth of the well, limkama, to its place. Ve'emer lehem, and he said to them, Yackov, Achai, my brothers, mi'ayin etem, from where are you? V'amru, and they said, Mecharan anachnu, from Haran we are. Ve'emer lehem, and he said to them, Hayadatem et Lavan, do you know Lavan? Ben Nahor, the son of Nahor. V'amru, they said, Yadenu, we know. V'yamer lehem, and he says, Ha-shalom lo, is it well for him? V'amru, they said, Shalom, it is well. V'hinei Rachel bito ba'a im hatzon, and behold, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the flock. Now, anytime we see in the Hebrew word the word hinei, it always is implying a context of, hey, pay attention, something huge is being pointed out here. Why am I saying this? Is because we don't actually use the word behold much anymore in our day-to-day language. It's actually kind of died off in English for the most part. And that's because it's just not being used the way it was actually originally intended. we kind of use different wordologies and stuff. Wordologies, like that word's a word I made up. We like to use different words and stuff to express our kind of context of, hey, pay attention. Like we may say like, whoa, look at that, or some other kind of terminology, and that kind of replaced behold. But maybe sometimes we can even use the gesture, when somebody does that little huffing of the sound and stuff to try to draw attention to something. This is the Hebrew way of doing it. It's hine. The word hine literally means hey. Look at that, right? So when we see here, it says Rachel, his daughter, right, was coming with the flock. Now, why is Rachel coming with the flock? Right? This is a question we have to ask ourselves. Why is a woman out doing a man's job? Now, the reason I say why is a woman doing a man's job is you have to think about this. To be with the flock meant you were kind of vulnerable, right? Because you had to be out there with the actual animals. You had to be out there in the middle of the field. And it's kind of funny because, the Bible says, and later on in Devarim, when it talks about the prohibitions of if a man sees a woman in the field, the first thing you have to think about is like, well, why are women in the field, right? Like, the things you could think about is like, well, maybe they're harvesting or something, but you'd be like, that doesn't really make sense. Why? Because there's tons of women that would normally be together when they're harvesting, right? So the point about it is, when would a woman be somewhere that's kind of like not normal, right? In this context, being a shepherd was that thing. So we have to look at the fact that how was Lavan towards his daughters? Yeah, he was not your average guy that cared for his kids, okay? You have to look at it from the standpoint is he actually made his daughters the ones that did the work. Well, you can see back that he really is the one that doesn't do much of anything, okay? And that's because when we look at the fact that what happened, here's her daughters going out there, right? And it's not the same thing that we find, for example, when we read in Shemot, because we see almost a similar aspect in Shemot when it talks about Rehu, when the Bible tells us about when, and I'll turn to it real quick, when it talks about Moshe, when Moshe goes over to the area of Yethro, right? When Moshe flees over to Midian, and when he's there in Midian, the Bible tells us that while he was there, that the daughters of, let me get it here, this is over in chapter 2 of Shemot, and it says, okay, so it says, Vayikesh laharog et Moshe, so he decided that he wanted to seek after to kill Moshe. Vayvrech Moshe, and Moshe fled mifnei Pharaoh, before Pharaoh, v'yeshev ba'aretz Midian, and he stayed in the land of Midian, v'yeshev al haber, and he stayed by the well. Ula Kohen Midian, and the priest of Midian was Sheva Benot, had 7 daughters, Utvona, and they came V'tildena to draw water, Meleta et ha-rahatim, to draw the water of the troughs, Tashkut Zahon Avihim, to water the flocks of their father. Vevu Rahim, and they came, the shepherds, Vegashu, and they drove them away. Vayikam Moshe rose up, Vishan, and he saved them. V'yashak et Tzonam, and he watered their flock. V'tavona el Roel. Okay, so here we have Roel as the father, right? But we know that really the father's name was Yethro. So we know Ruel was actually the grandfather. So when we see the daughters of Yethro, they're all together with each other. And we know when they went to Ruel, their grandfather. Here, Lavan, he's sending out his daughter by herself, right? She's the one out there shepherding by herself. So this just shows you the heart of how Lavan was, okay? So he sends his daughter out, and that's why the Bible then says, Hine Rachel bito ba'a im tzon, that Rachel, his daughter, was coming with the flock. V'yemer hen od hayom hagadol. He says, hey, the day is still great. Lo ed esav, it's not time to gather hamiknei, the cattle. Hashku atzon, water the flock. L'chu, and go and ra'u, and shepherd. V'amru, and they said, Lo nocha, we're not able to ad asher yesafu, until they gather, kol idrim, all the herds, all the herdsmen, vaglu, and they roll away ed ha'evan, the stone, mi'al pi haber, from the mouth of the well, v'hishkenu, and we will water Hatzaon, the flock. Now here in this context, we find that as Yaakov is investigating, he begins to realize something is funky going on, and that's the fact that what's happening. First, we see that Rachel is by herself, and they said, oh yeah, they gather the herdsmen and then they water the flock, which means what was happening to Rachel? He knew that she was being taken advantage of. And in this situation, we see that Yaakov, after he's filled out these guys to see where they're coming from and to see what's going on here, he begins to realize that he needs to step in, right? So this is the part where we see that this is what it means to be a man, right? It means to stand up and protect the women, right? And so in the Torah, as we go on and read, it says, Odenu medaber imam, and while still speaking with them, Rachel ba imatzon, Rachel came with the flock, asher la'aviha, which was belonged to her father, ki ro'ei hu. All right, so this is because a shepherdess she is, right? Now notice I said ro'ei hu, because that's exactly what the Torah says. It didn't say ro'ei he, it says ro'ei hu, right? And we have to ask the question, why does it say ro'ei hu, not ro'ei he, right? So we begin to ask this question here and stuff is, what is the Torah trying to help us understand, okay? And from this point, we can sit there and say, well, the Torah is trying to give us an understanding here is that she was put into a position that wasn't really meant for her to do. And you can imagine this, right? I mean, being a shepherd, you have to protect the flock. You have to be a guardian over the sheep. It's a physical job and demanding because you have to protect the animals, even from people who try to take advantage of your flock, right? That's why the Bible talks about shepherds as always being men, because men are the ones who have to protect the sheep, you have to protect the flock, you have to protect the people. And so you could see that she was put into a position that wasn't meant for her to do. And she was being taken advantage of, and she was being mistreated and what's the word? She was being misplaced in the stuff in the way that she would function in her role. Okay, so it says Vihi kesher ra'a Yaakov, and it was as Yaakov saw as Yaakov saw Rachel bat Lavan, the daughter of Lavan, Achi, the brother of Imo of his mother, Vet Zaon Lavan, and the flock of Lavan, Achi Imo, the brother of his mother, Yigash Yaakov drew near, Vigel, and he removed Et ha'evan, and he rolled the stone, Me'al pi haber, from upon the mouth of the well, V'yishak Et Hatzaon, and he watered the flock of Lavan, Achi Imo, the brother of his mother. So you see in this moment here, this is something that we see that's drastically huge, and that's the fact of what? Yaakov steps up, wants to protect, and in the moment of his protecting, he pushes away the stone himself, and he goes and he waters the flock of whom the well belongs to. And this is telling us this is exactly what we're to do. We're to protect the flock, and we're to water the sheep. And that's the thing that you find is what a man's job is. That's the man's job, okay? And when I'm gonna kind of clarify some things here, because we live in a time period where masculinity and femininity have just been destroyed, because you have women who don't know what it means to be a woman, who think that they've been belittled or been thrown down this tube of like nothingness. You have men who've elevated themselves in so many crazy points where even the understanding of being a man's also been depleted because of the perversion of how it's been presented. And we have to go back and say, what does the Torah really say we're to do, right? What does the Torah say? Because you see, we're going to find only peace and joy and happiness when we're fulfilling the role that God has created for us. A tree is not going to be a blade of grass, okay? It wasn't meant to be a blade of grass. Just like a lamb was not meant to be a kitty cat, okay? Everything that God created, he said, let me know, according to its kind, according to the functionality of what it was meant to do. There's a reason for why he created us, a reason for why he created each individual role. And the more and more we look into these roles, the more we begin to realize where we're happiest. Because why? Because it was intended on for us to be happy. When God made man and woman separate and different, he intended us to be happy in those roles, okay? A woman, she has her emotions and her feelings and her versions of how she is able to see things and stuff. But if not used properly, okay, she's an unhappy person, okay? Just like a man with his masculinity, with his understanding of different things, and with his leadership and stuff, if used improperly, it's destroyed, okay? And so we have to take all of these things and put them into the format of what is it supposed to be, okay? Like a woman's beauty is not to be flaunted. A woman's beauty is not to be thrown out there in front of everybody, okay? And that's because you weren't intended to be the way, but men weren't either. So, I mean, think about the simplicity of this and stuff. You know, the animal kingdom is always showing the animals as the males as being the more beautiful and look at me strutting myself stuff. But you see, that's the animal kingdom, but that's not the human kingdom, right? The humankind, us human beings, we weren't meant to be going around showing pictures of ourselves, doing selfies. Hey, look at this. This angle's better than that one. You know, that wasn't meant for us, okay? Going about trying to say, hey, look at me and look at all I do and look at how much I'm involved in and look at all my stuff I have. That wasn't intended for us either, okay? The things that we find in the Bible is living a simple life. And that simple life doesn't mean it's simple in the sense of not complexities and stuff. There's always complexities of life. It's simple in the sense of the way we're viewing things is not as ridiculous as the way the world views things, you know? And so we have to look at here the Torah. What does the Torah want us to understand? Well, if you ever look at the scriptures, and I want you to think about this and stuff, majority of the whole Torah is people living in a tent, right? I mean, think about that, okay? Does that make you less of a person if you don't live in a house? No. Matter of fact, the worth of man and all that attitude came from the worldly aspects of what we see in the scriptures. The first people to build the cities were the people of Cain. The first people to get caught up in instruments and all these different weaponries and stuff was Cain's lineage, okay? When we look at the fact of how the Bible represents and teaches us about our living and our lifestyle, all right, we find that the way we live in the scriptures was to be with our hands, all right, to be functioning people, to physically do stuff, all right? And this is stuff that's just mind-blown me away, because it's like the more I look at it, the more I'm seeing in the scriptures the way it is that God wants us to live, the more and more I'm recontemplating the things of how things have gone in my life, you know, things I made mistakes in and stuff, you know, things that I screwed up in, things that I failed and stuff in my own personal life. You know, there was a one time, for example, my wife worked, right? And I didn't like it in the beginning, I'll tell you that much. And it makes sense why I didn't like it in the beginning, all right? I didn't want her out there. I wanted to be doing it myself. But there was this crazy thing. I was in the Marine Corps. My wife was in the Marine Corps. We got out, and all of a sudden, you know, what are we? You know, we're a fire team buddy that's going to sit there and take care of each other, right? But the priorities of how we did things was just skewed. It was wrong. It was based on how we thought, not based on what the Bible taught, right? When you see things need to be corrected, you know, getting your wife to feel comfortable and stuff like that, she has to find herself and look at herself to see what is she doing, right? Am I really doing the role that I'm supposed to be doing, or did I make a mistake, you know? We had to learn this ourselves, you know? Matter of fact, the moment my wife decided, she realizes, you know what, I want to come home. I need to come home. You know, it was finally after years and years of making the mistake of not being home and working. And you realize and stuff that, you know, sometimes it's by your time period of just being out there and doing stuff that you realize that, you know, I'm not a happy person doing these things. And here I had all the job that I thought I wanted, and I had the things that I thought I wanted, but it really was not what I wanted. And that's because we're not going to be happy when we're doing it outside of God's will. We're not. There's always going to be this dysfunctional thing that's going to exist that's going to make us see that there's a problem. Just like when you elevate money and wealth and having a car or a house and stuff over living the way you're supposed to. There's always going to be that lack that you're going to find that's going to make you say you've unbalanced the scales and something. You got to get rid of the bad stuff and throw it away and start going back to the way the Torah said, right? And so when we look at this and we think about this very thing, here it is that, Yaakov, he's been raised by his father Yitzhak all these 40 years, right? And if there's one thing he knew, you don't sit there and let a woman get trampled. And you don't let a woman get taken advantage of. And he sat there and he saw that here's Rachel being taken advantage of by a bunch of people. And he knew that this wasn't just the first time this had been happening. And so the Bible says that when he went and he watered the flock, right? This is an important thing to realize and understand, okay? That we go and see here that it says that he went and he watered the flock, and it says, Vishkai Yaakov, and Yaakov watered la Rachel for Rachel, Visha et kolo, and he lifted up his voice, vayivech, and he wept. It's hard because a lot of emotions were going on here. And we have to realize this, because if we go and we read this and just bypass all the stuff that had been spoken of earlier, we're not going to see it. What are the reasons why we see Yaakov lifted up his voice and wept? Well, one of the things we find is that Yaakov wept because he realized that here it is, he's fled from Esau who wanted to kill him. He's impoverished, he has nothing. And here he is looking at this poor lady, and she's just been taken advantage of not only by her father, but even the people that were around her. And the whole emotion of everything, finally reaching them, finally being able to get them, finally being able to find that he was there safe like he prayed about, and then realizing the fact that he's seeing a woman who has been taken advantage of, and he had compassion. And this is one of the biggest things we have to realize and stuff, is the biggest aspect of what a real man is. We're compassionate. It's something that you don't see in the world. It's something, matter of fact, if you ever look at what you see in Instagrams and all these pictures, people are always trying to say, oh yeah, warrior, killer. That's the attitude people try to project, right? But that doesn't make you a man, okay? What makes us a man is the obedience and the love and the compassion we show. And I have more to learn in my own life. And, when I look at this thing, I think about the fact of the compassion and the fact that he lifted up his voice and wept. I think of how much is expressed in that very statement, because it's so generalized. To say he lifted up his voice means to go to say that he said everything that was burdening him. So you'd have to realize this stuff, that there's a lot that happened in this situation here. His meeting with Rachel, his communicating with Rachel, and then him seeing her being just taken advantage of and seeing how she was not at all enjoying life the way she should have. It says, Vayiged Yaakov, and Yaakov told Rachel, Ki achi aviha, for the brother of your father, who? Viki ben Rivka, and the son of Rivka, who? Veteratz, and she ran, Vetiged, and she told La'aviha, her father. Vihi Kishmuan was as hearing Lavan, et Shema, the hearing of Yaakov, ben Achoto, his brother, son of his brother, son of his sister, V'yaratz likrato, that he ran to meet him, V'yechabek lo, and he hugged him, V'nashach lo, and he kissed him, V'yevehu el beito, and he brought him into his house. V'yisaper Lavan, and Lavan related et kol hadevrim ha'ele, and Lavan related all of these things. Vayemer lo Lavan, and Lavan said to him, Ach atzmi, my bones, basari and my flesh, ata you are. V'yeshev yimam, and he stayed with him chodesh yimim for a month of days. So we know that the context of here, the month of days, tells us something funny here. It should have just said, and he stayed with him for a month, right? I mean, that's what we should have said. But why does the Torah say chodesh yimim, right? Well, there comes something here that we learn, and that was this, is that when Yaakov stayed with Lavan, he was miserable. And the reason why the Torah gives us the word chodesh yamim is to tell us that a day felt like a month. It was miserable. It was a horrible experience. And that was because Lavan treated Yaakov with the same garbage treatment he treated his own kids. This is Vayimer Lavan, and he said, Lavan LaYaakov, Achi ata. He says, my brother you are, right? Avadatani, that you should serve me chinam for nothing. Higadna li ma mashkovotecha. Tell me what should be your reward. So that means, think about it. For a whole month, he just was a slave. That's right. I've seen this before, where, you have somebody who's in your family that just likes to take advantage of you, and you're like the little workhorse and stuff. I've seen this stuff happen. It's crazy. And think about this. He spent a whole month, and every day felt like a month itself. It felt ridiculously long. It felt like the longest day of his life. Okay? And so here you have this quote-unquote loving uncle, this wonderful uncle, right? Who says, what should be your reward, right? Ulavan shtei banot, and Lavan had two daughters. Shem Hagadola, the name of the oldest one was Leah, but Shem Hakatana was Rachel, and the name of the younger one was Rachel. And Leah was Rachut, but the eyes of Leah were Charchut, tender. So what does it mean by saying the eyes of Rachel were tender? Well, we have to understand something here, which is going to be interesting. And that is the fact that Leah and Rachel were actually twins. That's right. That's why it was so hard, as we learn later on. How was he able to distinguish between who was who, right? Because they actually looked the same. The reason why the Torah tells us, Anai Leah Rachut, the eyes of Leah were Rachut, tender, it meant that Leah was more of an emotional person. So that means you got to think about it. She has an abusive father, is very ridiculous and mean and harsh, and obviously Rachel, you have the obviously different one. She was the hardcore, let's go out there gun-ho, Shira, okay? And how you say the word Shira, because I know a lot of people know that terminology and stuff. But she's your G.I. Jane, all right? And of course, who does Yaakov go for? He says, I want the G.I. Jane. She's the hardcore lady. That's why I married a Marine, right? Anyways, so this is Rachel, Hayata Yafet. And Rachel, she was Yafet Toar, beautiful of form, Yafet Mara, beautiful of appearance, all right? So obviously the point of it and stuff was, how was it that Yaakov looked at the two women? It's kind of funny when you look at the fact that what it says, because it doesn't mention Leah being beautiful of form and beautiful of appearance, okay? So the point is, what really was the difference of how he viewed it? Well, the eyes of Leah Rachut were tender. So he said, she's emotional. I can't stand her. She's always crying over stuff. That's what you have to realize. There had to be some kind of contextual thought or possible thinking of how he looked at Leah, right? Whereas he looked at Rachel as like, she's pretty. Very pretty, right? And that's just from the point of what it says. What it says, V'hayata yafat to'ar, beautiful of to'ar. To'ar is the word for form. And the word me'ara has to do with appearance. Okay? So, notice it talks about her as being beautiful in the way she was viewed, where the other one, he was viewing her from an emotional standpoint. Okay? Now, this is something we have to realize is really, honestly, something that we have to be careful with as guys. And that's the fact of what? Both of these are our emotional ways of viewing things. Are we emotionally looking at a woman and saying, oh, I think she's pretty, and oh, I think she's emotional, right? Because those are both emotional ways of viewing things, okay? It didn't describe Rachel or Leah as to how they really were as a person. You understand that? It described them more of how they were in regard to how we view them emotionally, okay? She's emotionally appealing and she's emotionally unappealing, okay? Which in some ways you can sit there and say for a woman, this is something you do want to put to your mind, and that's the fact of you don't want to be an emotional person, okay? And that doesn't mean you can't have emotions, okay? There's a big difference, okay? To be an emotional person means you don't want to be somebody who's constantly turning something into some emotional escapade because of something happening, right? Because it's not appealing to guys. And this is why you have to understand it from the Torah point of view, because the Torah is saying this is how guys view this, right? Because Rachel was out there shepherding the sheep, guys look at when women do these type of hardcore things as like, hey, she's good to go, right? That's what the Bible is trying to give us an understanding of. That's why girls can, when they look at these things, they can realize, guys don't want a wimpy attitude, right? Guys don't want to have where I'm just kind of like, I don't want to do things, right? And that tells you there's something here, like, we all can have attitudes of wimpiness. All of us can, right? A lot of these things are all products of what? Our environment. You got to think about this. What made Leah the way she was? Well, she dealt with a problem with her father, obviously, and struggled to know how to deal with it appropriately. Okay? So therefore you can say, Leah, it became an emotional thing. Because of the struggle she had with her dad, there was an emotional struggle that she had in herself. Where Rachel, it was because she looked at it as, well, since there's these things happening, she was trying to use it in a different format. So she kind of reverted the energy of how she looked at things. And so she kind of like, I'm just going to go out there and just do it. I'm going to just get it done. All right. And so an aspect of how she did stuff was positive. An aspect of how Leah did was negative. Right. And we see that flip-flop happening even later on in life, where you see that when you talk about Leah from a spiritual level, she's very positive. She thinks about God, she puts her attention on God, and she focuses upon things of God. Whereas Rachel, there's a lot of physicality and stuff that she struggled with. And that really goes to show the fact of like, you can't divorce these situations outside of the context of what they went through. And therefore you have to really look at this and see that, sadly, we are a product of our environment. What we go through in life, if we're given the love and the attention we need, we thrive. And even the Brit Chadashah teaches us that if you get 100% all the attention you need from your family the right way, the love, the encouragement and stuff, you thrive. But if you don't get that attention and love, you can struggle a lot. And if we can look at this stuff, we should see this from the point of view of the psychology that the Bible teaches us about why we are the way we are. I know myself, I've had my own personal things that have happened in my life that's made me who I am today. And not all of it's good. Some of the things are things I'm still working on and things that I don't like. But there's aspects of myself that I know that are products exactly of what I've been through and the things I've had to live in. And when you look at these things, think of Yackov, right? Yackov, it's kind of funny because the Bible talks about him as being the more homebody, right? It says that he was the one who would be an Ohalim, while his brother was the one who was out there doing all the hunting and outdoorsy stuff, right? But what was it that Yaakov wasn't a part of at this moment? Being the outdoorsy type, right? And it's kind of funny because him being a man, he grew because he realized and stuff that when he was with Lavan, he actually grew to become an outdoors person. Yes, his father lived in a tent, and yes, his father dwelled in those things, so he knew those things and learned those things. But there was aspects of Yaakov that he himself didn't become yet. And this is a part of one of the things that I have to say is the biggest joy of learning Torah, is learning that we're all learning, and we're all growing, and we all have aspects of ourselves that we need to grow in, areas that we haven't ventured in to become better or to become more matured in some parts. And this is kind of one of the things I think it has to be focused upon. Is think about this. I mean, like when we put these things into the proper perspective, what is the Torah trying to get us to understand? Is that we can always be molded in life. We can always be shaped. We just have to be willing to change. You know, here's Yackov. He comes, he lives with Lavan. And I'm not even at the part of reading the other parts. I'm just kind of skipping and jump ahead at times just because I know that many of you guys have read this and studied this and stuff. But to think about the points that we probably haven't focused upon, and that's the fact of, you know, what is the Torah teaching us? Because, you know what? The Torah talks about a lot of weaknesses of Abraham, Sarah, all the people reading the scriptures. There's always weaknesses that we'll find here and there, but if there's something that we look in deeper into the core of it, we begin to realize what made them who they were. Why did they struggle with what they struggled with? You know, why did Noah, for example, drink to his heart's content where he got drunk in his own tent? And, you know, if you don't put the real pictures back into the play here, you start realizing you don't see the picture. When you begin to realize that why did Noah get so drunk so much that he was naked in his own tent, and you think about the fact of like, oh, I can't believe that, but you go back and say, well, actually you can. Can you imagine having that one moment when you realize that all your family's dead? That's you're it? Just you and your family, that's all you have? Can you imagine the depression he felt, missing his father and his mother? Missing his uncles, his grandfather? And then what happened? One drink led to another to the point where he was so drunk, so depressed, so overwhelmed. And then he did something stupid. He got naked in his own tent. But you see, you'll never understand it if you don't look at the fact that, you know, that's actually how things fall apart. That's actually what we as people fall apart in. And if we don't look at the reasons of why people fall apart and what makes them fall apart, it's because we're missing the puzzle pieces. You know, I love the Bible and how the Bible exposes all of our possible failures and areas that we've made mistakes in or areas that we've lacked in. Because then it helps us realize, where did it come from? What caused it? What made us feel the way we did? You know, what made Rachel so tender? I mean, not Rachel, but Leah. You know, what made Rachel so hard? You know, maybe you should look at the fact that she had a very hard life and she was forced into positions that she didn't like. And so there's a part of her that she got rough and started pushing forth. But at the same time, it's amazing how the Torah indicates to us that there's an aspect to us, there's an aspect to you. You know, there's a lot of women out there that don't realize that they can do a lot more than they can. Women who don't think that they can go outdoors and do some hardcore things because they don't think that they can do that. They don't think that they're capable of doing that. Just like there's things with men who don't realize they're capable of doing manly things that they think, well, that guy's just bigger than me or whatever and stuff. And these are all lies. They're all things that we get trapped in because the enemy tries to deceive us. Trying to make us feel like and stuff like we can't be something or that we're not strong enough. Because, you know, and you notice this, the Bible never talks about muscle power. It never talks about, and he had big muscles and blah, blah, blah. It never talks about that because being a man has nothing to do with how many muscles you have, how big of a chest you have, how large are your biceps and stuff. Being a man has to do with the attitude. It's what we do and how we live. It's the way we function. And this to me is what blows me away. Because it cries out to everybody. To the women. It doesn't say, oh, if you have a size leg or chest or whatnot, then you're really pretty and stuff. It never mentions that. Notice that. It doesn't. It doesn't talk about that as being that's what characterizes what beauty or what womanly is. And yet you look in the world and everything's always trying to tell you the opposite. Everybody's always being compared to something. And the only thing God compares us to is characteristics. Are you loving? Are you compassionate? Are you forgiving? Are you tender? Are you merciful? Are you willing to teach? Are you willing to help? Those are all the characteristics we find over and over again being repeated. Those are the only important things that matter. And these are the things I really think we always need to figure out and think about for ourselves. What do we want to be? Who do we want to be? And what do we desire to become? Because only we can make those decisions. We just have to be willing to challenge ourselves in areas that we may feel uncomfortable in. I'm sure Yackov at times felt uncomfortable stepping out of his zone and had to learn to say, I need to man up. I need to do this. This is what you need to do. I've done some pretty crazy things that I never thought I'd do. And honestly, it amazes me when I sit back and realize, you know what? We gotta stop putting so much pressure on ourselves to think we can't do things at times. And just realize that the Bible says we can do all things. And I feel like the most important thing we should be learning as we learn about these characteristics of these people and stuff is, you know, it's not a manly thing to put people into positions where they're just in bondage to you and they're your slaves. What makes a man is someone who cares. Loving is tender. You know, like when you look at Ruel, obviously, you know, Jethro didn't have any sons. The Bible never mentions him having a son, period, but 7 daughters, right? And you can see that he was kind of in a stuck situation. What do? I got 7 daughters, right? And so he had all his daughters shepherd together. They could work with each other. Yet they were still what? Inferior. Because what happened when the men came? They came up against them. And Moshe had to save them. And women were never meant to be put in positions of that, where they have to be put where they're vulnerable to be attacked. And that really goes to show us that, you know, you're not less of a woman because you're not in the military or something. You know, what does a woman mean? What does it mean to be defined as a woman? Well, you were born a woman. And you should be very happy that God made you the way he did. He made you to be a wife, a mother, to raise children, to raise disciples, to teach people about God's love and mercy. And these are the things we have to think about. Some women can have children. Some women I've heard about and stuff, even my own life and stuff, that they're physically unable to because of physical things that they've had to go through or things they were born with that just made them incapable of being able to be married. And what does that do? Does that make you less of a woman? No. You know, God says if you're willing to reach out to people to teach them God's word, you're doing the job of a mom. When you're willing to reach out and guide people in love and mercy and help other women to know God's word and know his commandments, you're doing the job of what any woman should be doing. And you're no less than a woman. Having children and raising disciples, the Bible says, is just as equal. I mean, I feel like it's so important that when we learn through the scriptures about these people, that we learn to understand how we can learn from them, not only just spiritually, but also physically, so we can understand how we are to live in life. I hope you enjoy this lesson, and we'll see you next time.